I thought. Working at a restaurant was temporary until the night. Everyone turned against each other. I was 24 at the time this all happened. I worked at a mid-scale, locally owned restaurant that liked to brand itself as upscale without actually paying anyone like it was. We served handcrafted cocktails, seasonal menus, and the kind of food that arrived on oversized plates with small portions, which meant customers expected perfection and management expected us to deliver. The staff was large, but the real core of the restaurant was a tight, messy friend group that included almost everyone who worked there, from hosts to servers to bartenders to kitchen staff, and even one manager who blurred the line between authority and friendship so badly that it eventually became the root of everything that went wrong. We spent more time together than we did with our actual families. At first, that felt comforting. We celebrated birthdays together, closed the bar together, vented together in the alley behind the building, and told ourselves that no one understood us like we understood each other. Hunter was part of that core group, and he had been there longer than I had. He worked as a bartender most nights and occasionally picked up serving shifts when we were short-staffed. He had the kind of personality that made people feel like he was always on their side, even when he wasn't saying much at all. Customers loved him, management relied on him, and the staff trusted him in a way that felt unspoken but solid. If you asked anyone who the unofficial leader of the friend group was, they would have said Hunter, even though he never claimed that role and never seemed to want the attention. People listened when he spoke, and more importantly, they noticed when he didn't. I worked as a server, primarily night shifts, which meant I lived in a constant state of controlled chaos. On any given evening, I was juggling tables, refilling drinks, running food, calming guests, and absorbing stress like it was part of my job description. It was exhausting, but it was familiar, and familiarity can trick you into thinking you're safe. The restaurant itself had a rhythm, especially on weekends. Fridays and Saturdays were brutal, with long wait times, full sections, and managers pacing the floor like predators. Sundays were calmer but emotionally heavier, the kind of shifts where everything that went wrong during the week seemed to surface all at once. The night everything started unraveling was a Friday. It was the beginning of a particularly busy season, and the restaurant was booked solid with reservations and walk-ins stacked behind them. The air inside felt tense before the doors even opened, the kind of tension that settles into your shoulders and doesn't leave until long after last call. We were understaffed, which wasn't unusual, but management had assured us that everything would be fine. They always said that. Fine, in restaurant language, meant we would survive, but barely. The friend group had been off all day together before the shift, something I hadn't been part of because I had errands to run. When I arrived, I could tell immediately that something was off. Conversation stopped when I walked into the server station. Laughter sounded forced, and people avoided eye contact in a way that made my stomach tighten. I asked one of the hosts if something had happened, but she shrugged and said she didn't. No. I later realized meant she knew exactly what had happened and didn't want to be involved. Pre-shift meeting was rushed and unhelpful. Management reminded us to upsell cocktails, warned us about a large party coming in late, and told us to support each other. It all sounded normal, but the energy underneath it felt unstable, like the floor was already cracked. Hunter stood near the bar during the meeting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He didn't look at me, which was unusual. We weren't close in a romantic sense, but we were friendly, comfortable, and familiar. At least I thought we were. Once the doors opened, the night moved fast. Tables filled instantly. Tickets piled up in the kitchen, and the bar was slammed. Within minutes. I fell into autopilot, greeting guests, taking orders, and moving from table to table without thinking too much about anything else. That's how you survive busy nights. You don't think. It wasn't until about an hour into service that I noticed small things going wrong in a way that felt targeted. My drink tickets took longer than usual. Food from my tables came out late or wrong, even though I had entered everything correctly. When I asked for help running food, people were suddenly busy. At first, I assumed it was just the volume of the night. Everyone was overwhelmed, and mistakes happen. That's part of the job. But the pattern kept repeating. Tables around me were being supported, checked on, and helped. Mine were not. When I finally made eye contact with Hunter while waiting for drinks, he looked past me like I wasn't there. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't give me a nod, didn't even offer the small silent reassurance he usually gave when the bar was drowning. That was when the anxiety started to creep in. By the middle of the shift, I was behind. My tables were irritated, my tips were slipping, and my confidence was unraveling in real time. I kept apologizing for things I couldn't fix, absorbing frustration that wasn't mine and pushing myself harder to keep up. I asked a fellow server for help running food, and she hesitated before agreeing, her body language stiff and distant. When she returned, she avoided me entirely. Something had happened, and I was the only one who didn't know what it was. I tried to push through, telling myself I could figure it out later, but the feeling of being quietly excluded settled deeper with every passing minute. There's a specific kind of fear that comes from realizing the group you rely on has shifted without you, and you're suddenly standing on the outside, knocking without knowing why the door closed. The night stretched on, relentless and unforgiving. By the time the rush finally slowed, I felt wrung out, hollowed, and embarrassed in a way I couldn't explain. When the last tables paid and the lights came up, the friend group gathered near the bar, laughing and decompressing, their energy light and relieved. No one looked at me. I cleaned my section in silence, rolled silverware alone, and clocked out without anyone noticing. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a notification from the group chat. They were all going out for drinks and I hadn't been invited. I sat in my car for a long moment after reading that message, staring at the screen like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. The group chat had always been loud, chaotic, and inclusive, even when people were annoyed with each other. Someone always tagged everyone. Someone always made sure no one was left out, except me. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was tired anyway, and I should go home and sleep. Those thoughts sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath them was something sharp and humiliating that I couldn't ignore. I drove home instead of following them. I replayed the shift in my head, trying to pinpoint what I had done wrong. I thought about every interaction, every order, every moment I might have said something that came across the wrong way. Nothing stood out. By the time I got home, the group chat was alive with photos and updates. Drinks on the bar, smiling faces, and inside jokes I didn't understand because I hadn't been there when they started. Hunter appeared in more than one photo, always close to the center of the group, always relaxed. Seeing him like that, knowing he hadn't even looked at me during the shift, made something in my chest tighten. I didn't respond to the chat. I didn't ask questions. I didn't defend myself. I just went to bed feeling like I had missed a meeting where my own reputation had been decided. The next day was worse. I came into work for a double shift, hoping things would reset in the daylight, but the atmosphere was just as tense, if not more. People were polite but distant. Conversations hushed when I entered a room and laughter muted in my presence. I finally cornered one of the hosts I trusted and asked her directly if I had done something wrong. She hesitated, eyes darting around the restaurant before telling me that she didn't want to get involved. That was when I knew it wasn't small. The rumor, as it slowly came together through fragments and overheard comments, was that I had complained to management about the bar during the busy shift, blaming them for slow service and mistakes. According to the story, I had specifically singled out Hunter, accusing him of favoritism and incompetence. None of it was true. I hadn't spoken to management at all that night beyond routine communication, but in a restaurant, perception spreads faster than facts, and once a narrative takes hold, it doesn't need evidence to survive. What hurt most wasn't the rumor itself. It was how easily everyone believed it. Hunter never asked me about it. He never gave me a chance to explain. He simply withdrew his support, and the rest of the group followed without question. In that environment, silence from someone like him was louder than any accusation. The shift dragged on. Every interaction weighed down by unspoken tension. I did my job, kept my head down, and tried not to show how deeply it was affecting me. But the stress compounded with every hour. Near the end of the night, I overheard plans being made again. Another outing, another invitation that didn't include me. This time, something in me snapped, not explosively, but quietly, in a way that felt final. I realized that I could keep pretending this was temporary, or I could accept that the environment had turned hostile in a way that would only get worse. Still, part of me wanted answers. After closing, as the group prepared to leave, I approached Hunter. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I simply asked if we could talk. He looked surprised, almost inconvenienced, but nodded. What followed was not a conversation so much as a confirmation of everything I feared. He told me that management had mentioned concerns about teamwork and that my name had come up, He said he didn't want drama. He said he was choosing to stay out of it. Staying out of it in this case meant letting the group believe I had betrayed them. I walked away feeling smaller than I had ever felt at that job. They went out without me again that night. I went home and stared at my ceiling, realizing that the place I had poured years of effort into was no longer safe. By the time the next weekend rolled around, the idea that I was difficult had solidified into something no one questioned anymore. I didn't hear it directly, not at first. It showed up in smaller, more damaging ways. My sections were worse and filled with high-maintenance guests and large parties that tipped unpredictably. Late rotations left me scrambling while others coasted. When I asked about it, the floor manager claimed it was random, but I had worked there long enough to know what random actually looked like. Random doesn't repeat itself this consistently. Hunter was scheduled behind the bar again that night, a prime Friday shift. I was scheduled to serve a full section and then help close, which meant I would be there long after most of the group had counted their tips and left together. The restaurant filled quickly, voices stacking on top of each other, the air thick with heat, alcohol, and impatience. I moved fast, faster than I should have, trying to stay ahead of the inevitable mistakes that come with exhaustion. The bar backed up almost immediately. Drinks for my tables took so long that guests flagged me down before I could even reach them. Irritation already sharp in their voices. I checked the bar screen repeatedly, watching tickets sit untouched while newer ones disappeared ahead of them. It was impossible not to notice. I tried to problem solve without making it personal. I refilled waters, brought bread, offered apologies, and absorbed the frustration. Still, my tips suffered, and the tension followed me from table to table like a shadow. At one point, a guest asked if something was wrong with the bartender. I said no. I said we were just busy. I said it with a smile that felt stretched too thin. In the kitchen, food runners avoided my trays. When I asked for help, I was met with sighs and tight smiles, the kind that said yes but meant no. The friend group floated through the shift together, laughing between rushes, leaning against counters during brief lulls, their camaraderie intact and visible. I existed adjacent to it, never inside. By the middle of the rush, a large party arrived early, throwing the entire flow off balance. Their drinks were complicated, their requests constant, and their patience non-existent. I entered everything carefully, double-checking modifiers, doing everything right. The drinks took 25 minutes. By the time they arrived, the table was openly angry. One guest asked for a manager while another accused me of ignoring them. I stood there, apologizing, trying to hold the situation together while knowing exactly where it had unraveled. Management pulled me aside afterward, their tone controlled but disappointed. They reminded me of the importance of communication, of teamwork, of not letting personal issues affect performance. I nodded and accepted it because that's what you do when you know defending yourself will only make it worse. What hurt most was that Hunter watched the entire interaction from behind the bar without intervening, without acknowledging that the delay had not been mine. He wiped glasses, chatted with coworkers, and avoided my eyes. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that this wasn't passive anymore. It wasn't just people believing a rumor. It was an active choice to let me fail. When the rush finally died down, I retreated to the server station and breathed through the shaking in my hands. I had never felt so isolated in a room full of people. Later that night, as closing side work began, I overheard laughter drifting from the bar. Plans were forming again. Another night out. Another bonding ritual I wasn't welcome at. I didn't wait to see if I would be invited. I finished my work, clocked out, and left without saying goodbye to anyone. In my car, I sat in silence, replaying the night in my head until a different realization emerged. Quiet, but undeniable. If I stayed, this would escalate. Restaurants. Don't let things stagnate. They rot or they explode. And I was standing in the middle of something that was about to do both. The week after that shift felt unreal in a way that was almost worse than outright hostility. Nothing dramatic happened on the surface, just a steady, deliberate erosion of my place in the restaurant. My schedule stayed thin, my sections stayed difficult, and the atmosphere stayed cold. People spoke to me when they had to, and nowhere else. The friend group continued orbiting each other, arriving together, leaving together and sharing jokes that ended the moment I walked into the room. It would have been easier if someone had yelled at me. Instead, everything was quiet, which meant I had too much space to think. The next Saturday was another full house, another night where the restaurant ran at maximum capacity with minimum support. The kind of night where cracks don't just show, they widen. From the beginning, I worked differently. I stopped over-apologizing. I stopped absorbing blame that wasn't mine. And I stopped smoothing things over for other people. I focused on my tables, my timing, and my presence. And something unexpected happened. My tables noticed. Without me prompting anything, guests began commenting on the delays elsewhere. Drinks taking too long, food arriving inconsistently, and confusion at the bar. I didn't try to explain. I simply acknowledged their experience and kept moving. When the bar backed up again, I didn't hover or push. I adjusted expectations. At my tables calmly and clearly. When food ran late, I communicated directly with the kitchen, instead of relying on runners who had already decided not to prioritize me. The night was still hard, but it wasn't chaotic in the way management expected it to be. The chaos existed elsewhere. The friend group, so used to protecting each other, began tripping over itself. Sections overlapped and drinks went missing. Side work was skipped because everyone assumed someone else had it handled. Without me quietly compensating for gaps, those gaps became visible. A table near the bar complained loudly about inconsistent service. Another asked why different servers were giving them different answers. A guest flagged down a manager and asked plainly why the restaurant felt disorganized despite being fully staffed. None of that came from me. I was too busy working. Hunter, for the first time in weeks, looked stressed. The ease he usually carried slipped as the bar fell behind and no one stepped in to smooth things over for him. Management hovered closer to his station than usual, their attention sharp and uncomfortable. I noticed the shift in energy, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. This wasn't personal anymore, it was structural. The restaurant relied on unspoken labor, on people quietly covering for inefficiencies because it felt easier than calling them out. I had been part of that system before, cushioning mistakes and softening edges. Now I wasn't. By the end of the rush, management pulled the team together for a quick check-in. The tone was tense. Words like communication and awareness floated through the air, no names attached, but everyone understood where the pressure was pointing. For the first time since this began, I wasn't included in the glance that followed. After close, the friend group gathered as usual, but the mood had changed. The laughter was thinner. People lingered instead of rushing out together. Hunter didn't avoid me this time. He watched me from across the room, his expression unreadable, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in weeks and realizing something had shifted that he couldn't control. I clocked out quietly and walked past them without waiting, to see if I would be invited. This time I didn't care. The next several shifts confirmed what I had already felt in my body. The restaurant had been leaning on invisible labor for a long time, and I had been one of the people providing it without realizing it. I had smoothed over delays, softened guest frustration, filled in communication gaps, and absorbed mistakes. Quietly because it felt easier than pushing back. Now I didn't. I didn't announce the change. I didn't make a point of it. I simply stopped doing work that wasn't mine and stopped protecting people who had already decided not to protect me. The effect was subtle at first. A table waited a little too long for drinks. A host hesitated, unsure where to seat a party because no one answered their question quickly enough. A manager paused near the bar longer than usual, watching ticket times climb. These weren't crises. They were symptoms. The friend group felt it immediately. They grew louder and more defensive, their conversations sharper. Complaints that had once been shared casually turned bitter. Mistakes were still happening. But now they were being explained away instead of fixed. Hunter changed in ways that were impossible to miss. He stayed planted behind the bar, barely stepping away. His movements lost their ease. He checked the screen obsessively, remade drinks without being asked, and stopped chatting between orders. The relaxed confidence that had once made him untouchable thinned into something tight and brittle. For the first time since this started, I wasn't watching him avoid me. I was watching him unravel under scrutiny. Management began asking questions that didn't come with immediate solutions. Why were ticket times inconsistent even when volume was steady? Why did some sections run smoothly while others struggled? Why did problems cluster around the same areas shift after shift? Those questions landed uncomfortably close to the group's center. I kept my head down and worked. Guests responded to the consistency and my tips stabilized. Some nights they improved. A few tables mentioned how calm I seemed despite the pace. I thanked them and moved on. The restaurant began to feel divided, not by open conflict, but by approach. One side worked defensively, reacting to problems as they surfaced. The other worked deliberately, anticipating needs and staying within clearly defined roles. Management gravitated toward the latter. The night everything cracked wasn't a Friday or Saturday. It was a midweek dinner service that was busy enough to matter, but quiet enough to reveal patterns. There were fewer staff members, which meant fewer places to redirect blame. When the bar fell behind again, a manager stepped in to help and didn't leave. Drinks were remade, orders were checked and rechecked, and the easy explanations dried up. The manager's presence made every inefficiency visible. Hunter was pulled aside near the end of the rush. I didn't hear the words, but I saw the result. His shoulders slumped slightly. His nod was small and contained. Whatever had been said, it wasn't a warning. It was an acknowledgement. After that shift, no one invited anyone out. The friend group lingered awkwardly, talking in fragments before dispersing in different directions. The group chat stayed silent. The next schedule told the rest of the story. My hours returned first, then my sections improved. I wasn't told why, it simply happened. The friend group began to fracture quietly. One person called out repeatedly, and another asked for fewer shifts. Someone else left altogether. Hunter remained, but his role had changed. He was still competent, still polite, still liked by guests, but the social gravity that once centered everything around him was gone. And with it, his ability to decide who belonged. Restaurants don't explode when they fail. They erode. The drama didn't climax in one moment. It thinned out, drained of energy and meaning, until there was nothing left to sustain it. The loud personalities disappeared first. The quieter ones adapted or moved on. Hunter and I worked overlapping shifts occasionally. There was no confrontation or apology. We passed each other with the neutral politeness of people who had once shared something unspoken and no longer needed to name it. That was enough. I thought I would feel vindicated watching the group dissolve, but I didn't. What I felt instead was distance and emotional separation, the kind that arrives when you realize something no longer has power over you. The restaurant no longer felt hostile. It also no longer felt like home. One night, after a steady, uneventful shift, I clocked out and stood in the empty dining room. For a moment. Chairs were stacked. Lights dimmed. The air smelled faintly of sanitizer and leftover food. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt done. I left my apron in the car and never brought it back inside. The next morning, I sent a short message to management giving notice. They responded professionally, even warmly, thanking me for my consistency and wishing me luck. There was no mention of the past, no attempt to retain me. That felt like closure. I found another restaurant not long after. It was smaller with less social entanglement. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't ask me to disappear to belong. Sometimes I still think about that place and how quickly loyalty turned conditional and how easily silence became a weapon. About how one person's decision not to intervene can shift an entire room. I didn't gain anything. I simply stopped losing myself, and that was enough.